I really dreamt up the project when I was working on a women's community activism project here at the University of Portsmouth. And I went along to PARCS. There was something very different about it as an organisation. It was really clear that they were doing something exceptional in the city. And then I recorded the oral history of Kim Hosier, who was the director of the centre. And then she said, we're celebrating our 40th anniversary. Would you be interested in doing a history of our service? And I just thought, what an incredible project that would be, because they have 40 years of history about the area of sexual violence, which is so taboo in our culture that we don't really know how to work with people who've experienced that. And there's so much wisdom at PARCS around that, so it would be terrible to lose all that.
Rape was happening in our city and nobody was doing anything. There were no services. I think it was that. Not only was it just so awful, but that nothing was being done, it wasn't really being recognised. I think it was that. That was the sort of spark for me.
Oh, very scary. Very scary, I thought Diana was. Yeah, she was quite a figure, and she'd actually started off very close, obviously, and yeah, we were all in a bit of awe of Diana. Well, I was in those days. That fear disappeared with time, but at the beginning, yeah.
I worked alongside Diana the whole time that I was involved at PARCS, and I just think the way that she managed to change what had been such a negative experience for her into such a fantastic service for the people of Portsmouth. She was an inspiration.
When she decided to set up PARCS, she invited a board, I think a board of like 4 men, to back her, just with ideas about funding. There was something about Diana, I think, that drew good people around and managed to support the organisation.
It's an end of terrace Victorian house, which is just kind of standard Portsmouth.
You used to go in one door because it was 2 houses next to each other. So you'd go in one door and then you'd come out the other door.
No one would know what it was. If you walked past it in the street, you wouldn't know what it was.
It just felt like a normal house. I was just visiting someone's home. It was really kind of weird, that the sense that something really important was going on inside it, and you could just go through this door and all this kind of stuff was happening. So it felt like a bit covert.
It was very run down, and it was a bit like some of the people that came to us, really. It was vulnerable, it was fragile, it was, there were holes around the windows, there was mould growing. And I remember one Saturday, Fran and I had this massive bang, and we'd run out into the garden and the bay had fallen off the wall. It was a bit like, oh my God, the building's actually falling apart around us. I had a friend who owned a window company, Wonderful Windows, and I said to him, I was like, look, our windows are literally falling out. And he came and gave us 3 windows. And my husband's a plumber, so he'd come in and help us with our plumbing issues. So it wasn't just the people in PARCS that believed in PARCS, the community came and helped us too. I think the clients loved it as well, because it wasn't like a therapeutic space and it's all lovely and white walls and professional. It didn't look like that, it was comfortable, being held together with love. So I think it was definitely something that you grew to love, rather than you walked in and was like, oh, this place looks lovely. From the outside, PARCS works with 5 to 105 for people that have been sexually assaulted, abused, experienced domestic abuse. on the inside, we're all really passionate about helping people and giving people a voice and treating them fairly.
I remember having my first pretty detailed phone call with a lady that was really hard. It was really traumatising, the stuff she'd been through, and really not what I would expect from a phone call, I guess. You kind of prepare yourself, obviously, based on the nature of the phone calls, you kind of prepare yourself for the conversations, but it was really awful. So that was quite challenging, and I learned a lot from that, and I got a lot of support from Parks.
I always hate it when I'm talking about the line, because obviously I was hearing some horrific things that people told us, and it sounds really awful, but it made me feel useful. I didn't enjoy the fact that that was the stuff they were talking to me about, but I think that I was quite good at responding to them and helping them to at least get some stuff off their chest.
It was interesting. It was a real kind of pioneering, because of course rape crisis grew out of the women's movement, and it was very much a massive move away from the ethos to start working with men. And, you know, Diana Warren Holland, she'd really gone out on a limb to set up the men's service. I mean, she got death threats from as far afield as Australia, as, you know, how dare she go against the women's movement? How dare she make a women's only space to invite men? So, yeah, there were lots of issues, I think, in a rape crisis centre daring to step over that line.
I loved Angaston Road, but it was getting to a point where it was not habitable for the service in terms of health and safety. But I loved that building so very much. I can remember the more strategic thinking around why we need to move and what's that about, and if we stay, it's going to look like this. If we go, it's going to look like this. And then it was, we're in. We're going to make this big decision.
The fact that it was something that Parks as a charity were able to buy, and the stability of the charity needed it.
When we moved to Goldsmiths, to the one next to Tesco's, it had a lot of anxiety around it because it was a big deal. It was a big deal that we had our own property. It was ours. Because it was ours, it enabled us to have the freedom to do more things. But then there were problems with that as well. I remember there was problems with the sewerage, glazing, so it always felt like we were kind of cursed with building problems.
It was a bit of a culture shock in that it was a very, very different type of building. The building itself appeared much, much more clinical in the respect of it being an old GP's kind of surgery.
Yeah, I did struggle with the move because so much of it felt like it was like in the walls in the old building, it had everything.
It was a really good move. It gave people a kind of sense of independence and ownership of that place. And it was a new start, it was a new beginning. So I think everyone really enjoyed it. Was really nervous about it. And it was the first time I think we actually said where we were. So the place in North End was a kind of secret location that you didn't talk about.
It was about that whole thing about we're being hidden, our clients are hidden, they're hiding what's happened to them. And so we were like, no, we're not going to do this anymore. Yeah. We are going to be visible and we're going to make you feel uncomfortable because this is happening. And I can remember Kim and I did the Great South Run together. And I have to say I did feel quite uncomfortable because we had these purple T-shirts on, and I think mine was purple and in white letters it said childhood sexual abuse, and hers just said rape and sexual assault. We started to do a lot more community work. Yeah. We started to rock up at Victorious, and I think we found a way of working that was palatable.
I think the challenges are funding. The funding's getting less and less, and it's getting harder and harder to access. And with that, everybody wants short-term work, and they want what might take 2-3 years, they want you to do in 6 weeks. In my view, it's just not doable. These people deserve and require long-term work.
When I first arrived there, it was a bit hand-to-mouth. Kim was doing her very best, but I think Kim and I started working well together, and so we were better at planning in terms of money's coming in, where's it going, how are we spending it. Kim was very good at identifying new funding opportunities, so we'd both work on that. She'd put all the bits in about all the wonderful things we do, and I'd put in, how we're going to use the money and how it all added up. And we didn't win everything, but we won quite a lot of work.
The low point for me was watching the essence of what was Parks and what was so beautiful be strangled by outside pressures, funders, stakeholders, all of that. It did some amazing transformative work, and that is so sad to know that it's gone. Something that was truly amazing.
I think it's important to share these stories because I think the Parks that was, so not the Parks that is now, is very much, I think we will see it, we are beginning to see it, as counterculture. So the way we worked and what we offered to the local community is disappearing. So there's something about that counterculture, I think, that needs to be recorded. And I hope in a few years' time we will go back to that model.
I think we all really want other rape crisis centres and other people in the sector to know how it was done here, the things that happened here, and we really hope that it will help to shape the sector into the future.
It's part of the story of Portsmouth, in its rich diversity, but also it's a story that will get lost unless somebody records it. That's the important thing. These initiatives, they exist, they make waves for a bit, and then inevitably things move on, and unless you're careful, the thing's forgotten.
I believe in the power of stories about ordinary people. They're not ones that are often told. I believe specifically that these stories would easily be lost and deemed not particularly important or not particularly glamorous in terms of people working and volunteering at a rape crisis centre. And I believe that the people that did work at Parks and volunteer their time at Parks have spent a lifetime focusing on the stories of others. That's essentially what we would do. So recognising their story in this project is something that was just so important.
Obviously, steps sharing the stories of Parks and individual experiences of being at Parks continue to get the message out there about sexual and physical violence towards women and men, because unfortunately it's still continuing. I'd love to say we've come a long way, and I think we have come a distance.
I think it's really important to share stories like this as part of history. I think when we get people's voices on these things, it's not taken from second hand or third hand. It's the people that were actually involved from the grassroots level. A lot of volunteers actually, so a lot of people that gave up their own time to be involved and support these individuals. but also so we can piece together when we look back on how far we've come and how far we've still got to go in terms of feminism and activism.
I feel quite passionately about this. They can learn to value lived experience. We're seeing that disappear from the sector. We're seeing an over-professionalisation of the sector. I won't be the first person to say that. And you need a balance. You need to have people that value people's dignity and believe in justice, whatever that justice might look like, and you have to have those people working in your organisation, and you have to make it possible for them to work in your organisation, because these people, working class people, survivors, people with lived experience, and I include all genders in that, will find it hard to sit in a real over-professionalised organisation, and that's not their fault. So I believe that the sector can learn to just pay more attention to the structure of their organisation and how they are supporting people to be able to bring their whole selves into that organisation. Because right now, we're creating something where people can only bring a version of themselves, and that's PARCS never did that.
Well, that might be political, I think, just outside. I'm thinking of the politics of today, yeah, and the politics of what it means to support and help people who have had deep trauma, so people, humans who have been affected by difficult things, and how there's this kind of like general movement at the moment that the time that is spent therapeutically is being reduced. It's being sort of like made more kind of technical in a way, the way those services are offered, and how could we kind of expand, how could we say what people deserve, who have had traumatic experiences, is longer, more consistent treatments, and could we kind of bring that kind of approach back,
There are other sectors out there working in a similar way to PARCS, but I think PARCS has always been unique. I know I'm biased. I think it's been unique because we've attracted a very special group of therapists and workers, people who are truly dedicated to what they believe. It's not just about work, it's so much more. PARCS became part of all of us, I think. It was in our blood, and we very much felt of it as our PARCS family.
I think there's some big parts of PARCS which would really be useful to kind of carry forwards into different organisations, different charities, and I suppose there's a part of me that's concerned, worried about how charity sectors, counselling organisations, those types of processes are becoming more business-like orientated, and I think for me PARCS was a very grassroots is the kind of the phrase that's used quite often, but client-led, person-orientated organisation, and I think there's a big loss of that.
And right from when PARCS started, I think it's always felt like quite an expansive, quite an activist space. I think like they always, right from when I started, they were always working with people of all genders. Although we weren't talking about it a lot, I think that work was always happening. So I would think that people would learn about possibility, that it's possible to do a lot of different work in a space that isn't maybe what, I think it's challenging kind of stereotypes and myths about what supporting survivors of sexual violence and domestic abuse looks like, and who can do it in terms of who are the therapists and who are the clients and how we operate together in that space. I think there's a lot to be learnt from that.
Well, I guess newer organisations, it will be interesting for them to look at how PARCS began, how we worked, how we grew, how we developed, how PARCS, the PARCS of those 40 years, how it came to an end. So I'm hoping it might help them to reflect on and think about how they're actually working with their local communities and maybe develop different models of working to the ones that are offered at the moment.
Yes, so one of the really central pieces of this project is that it's an intergenerational project. We have a young feminist collective led brilliantly by Gemma Green, who worked for decades at PARCS, who has carried the baton forward with these young feminists. So they've been doing the interviews with the long-memoried women and men who worked at PARCS. And what that has created is a new sort of wave of activism around the topics that they've been hearing about and that they've been learning about. And as I was saying before, this sense of resilience, I think, has really impacted on the young feminists. And we've done all kinds of really interesting things along with the actual content of recording stories. We went to a conference and the young feminists just shone. They came forward with their skills and with their confidence really growing each time that we kind of take another step in the project. And I think for the long-memoried women on the other side of that, I think there's also a really lovely sense of being actually acknowledged and heard by younger people, because I think ageism is something that we all experience as we do get older, a sense that what you have lived through maybe isn't so relevant anymore. And while older people have so much to learn from younger people, it's also the other way around. So I feel really proud that there is this intergenerational element to the project.
I work with other young feminists to create social media pages. It's mostly Instagram that we do. And we've tried to create a scrapbook style page, which some people have said is quite different from like your standard posts and graphics. But for us it was really about highlighting, I want to say that highlighting the vivacity of the project, and how many different elements come into it, and how that is kind of like a scrapbook. Like it's all digital, but it feels like we created an online scrapbook, and I really love that.
I think something that's surprised me about the whole process is the relationships that have formed within the project team, and especially with the young feminists that have been acting as interviewers and fulfilling all kinds of other roles on this project. It's really become a multi-layered thing. So not only have we been collecting these interviews, but we've also kind of grown as people as well. Built what I hope will be really lasting relationships, and hopefully provided a real growth experience for the young feminist group.
I've learned a lot about myself in terms of exploring lots of different avenues that I wouldn't have normally gone down. One of them being interviewing, never interviewed before, and found that I threw myself into it. I was nervous at the beginning, but found it was something I actually really enjoyed doing. Learned a lot about me as an interviewer, but also things that I could work on myself. And then when we move on to more of the coding work that we're involved in, again, something that I wasn't, something that I had never done before, but actually something that I think are key for future in terms of leadership roles that I'm looking to go into. but also I guess one of the main things, the umbrella for all of it, is also about teamwork and working with a group of people that we all have different lives, different histories, different backgrounds, and also different reasons for being involved in the project.
I think they've come together, they've shared stories, I've seen them grow, I've seen them develop in terms of their confidence. They've had opportunities to develop new skills. Certainly what they say is they've learnt, because we're kind of like old dinosaurs to them now, so they've sort of learnt, you know, some of the things that they've never really thought about because they weren't around in the 70s and 80s. But I think it's a two-way thing. I think we've learned and been challenged by them as well, so it's been like a breath of fresh air coming into the project. So I very much see it as two-way, cross-fertilisation, if you like.
For me, I'm really going to take away the importance of stories and the importance, sounds silly, but the importance of life in all its aspects. And because none of these women who worked in parks were defined by parks completely, and I just think that's really important to hold on to, because they all brought different things into their work. They all brought themselves into their work. So I think I'm really going to hold on to that.